Will Britain break up? On 31st January 2020, Britain left the EU. Now the union between the nations of the UK is looking fragile. Part 1. What's in a name?
What is the correct name of the large triangular island just north of France? Some people say England, some Britain, some Great Britain, or even the United Kingdom. All are correct in some way. If you're confused, don't worry. So are many British people. What kind of nation cannot even decide on its name? The rationale for it all goes like this.
England.
England is the biggest and most populous nation on the island. Historically, the English had a nasty habit of visiting other parts of the island with an army, and also the neighbouring island of Ireland, and, to be honest, much of the rest of the world as well.
Great Britain.
Contrary to what some think, Great Britain and Britain are not interchangeable, nor is great a declaration of national excellence. Great Britain is just the geographical name of the island where England, Scotland and Wales are located. The Romans first called it that to differentiate it from the other place they called Britannia, today's Brittany in France. So in fact, Great Britain is smaller than Britain.
Britain.
Britain is a political entity comprising the nations of England, Scotland and Wales, but also Northern Ireland, which Britain retained when the Irish took back control of their island a century ago. Foreigners often incorrectly use England for Britain and vice versa. So do the English sometimes. The Scottish, Welsh and Irish do not.
The United Kingdom.
The full name is, in fact, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which highlights Britain's status as a monarchy. So if Britain became a republic, the UK would simply cease to exist. Yet if Britain breaks up, the UK could, in theory, continue if each country chose to keep the monarchy. But in a few years, will Britain even exist? Part 2. Pride of Scotland.
After America's Stars and Stripes, Britain's Union Jack is probably the most recognizable flag design in the world. It combines England's red on white cross with the Scottish white on blue X-shaped saltire and the red on white saltire that Ireland had at that time. It's a seriously cool design. But it may not exist for much longer. Today, many Scots are opposed to the union that was established between them and England in 1707. That union came about because Scotland's nobles had bankrupted themselves trying to create a colony in modern-day Panama. Their plan had been to establish control over the shortest Pacific Atlantic trade route, which was a good idea, but nobody told them about the mosquitoes. Ruined, they voted in favor of a union with England in return for financial aid, and the ordinary Scots never forgave them. Britain may have been a great economic and political success for all concerned, but Scottish pride has always resisted government from London. There was a referendum on Scottish independence in 2014, in which 55% of Scots voted to remain in Britain. But a critical argument then was that an independent Scotland would not be in the EU. At the time, Brussels, hoping to discourage independence movements in Spain and elsewhere, suggested that reintegration would be difficult. Many Scots, whose sense of connection to Europe goes back centuries to the old alliance between themselves and France, against the English, were understandably hesitant. Then, just 2 years later, Brexit happened. Worse, this was an English choice because Scotland voted heavily in favor of remaining in the EU. Naturally, most Scots feel there should therefore be a second independence referendum, and many polls suggest the result today could be different. The problem is that a referendum must be legally sanctioned by the government in London. The strategy of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, an Englishman and leader of the Brexit campaign, is simply to refuse to give another referendum. That refusal is only exacerbating Scottish pro-independence feeling. 70% of under 35s are now in favor of independence, but many older Scots are still pro-union on economic grounds. If Brexit turns out to be an economic disaster, the same thing that brought Scotland into Britain could take it back out again. Part 3. A divided Ireland.
For centuries, Ireland was essentially treated as an English colony before being incorporated into Britain in 1801. When the Irish finally regained independence 120 years later, the northeastern part of the island became divided from the rest. This was because a majority of people there were descended from Protestant English colonists who fervently opposed separation from the UK and becoming a religious minority in the mainly Catholic Republic of Ireland. And so the predominantly Protestant part became a separate entity, Northern Ireland, and remained in Britain. It was always an ugly solution, provoking decades of tension and terrorism there between the Catholic minority, who wanted to be united with the rest of Ireland, and the Protestant majority, determined to remain British. It was only when the EU came into existence and national borders became less important that a political compromise became possible. But now Brexit has made a mess of it. Since nobody wants a return of a physical border between the two parts of Ireland, a paradoxical compromise was found. Northern Ireland, although politically part of Britain, is geographically inside the EU free trade zone. This means there is a trade border inside Britain across which certain products cannot transit. The situation cannot continue, and opinion in Ireland is moving inexorably in the direction of a united Ireland. Protestants are no longer the majority in Northern Ireland, and today's Irish are largely secular, making the religious question less divisive. Increasingly, both sides debate Irish unification in terms of economics, not nationalist passions. A referendum is due to be held on Irish reunification sometime this decade. If Brexit produces more negative effects than positive ones, then a majority of Northern Irish might well vote to leave Britain. Part 4. Small Wales, Little Englanders.
There's one country in Britain whose symbol, a red dragon, doesn't appear on the Union Jack. Wales. This is because England basically conquered the small country way back in the 13th century. By the time the first Union Jack was created in 1606, they had stopped even thinking of Wales as a separate nation, and so left it off. Today, the idea of independence, now supported by 35% of the Welsh, is gaining ground there as well, although an independent Wales may not be economically realistic. The English, meanwhile, are sanguine about the idea of one or more countries leaving their union. In a 2021 poll by Savanta Comres, a political research consultancy, 55% of them supported or had no strong opinion or opposition to Scottish independence. As for Irish reunification, in a 2021 YouGov poll, 57% said they would be pleased or not bothered. Part of the reason for this is that English nationalism has also been growing over the past couple of decades. English flags, which in the past were never seen outside football stadiums, are now a common sight, while Union Jacks are in retreat. The part of society that opposes this nationalist tendency, such as the 47% of English who voted to remain in the EU during the 2016 referendum, call their isolationist compatriots by the derogatory term of Little Englanders. A Little Englander thinks their country is the best and should only collaborate with other nations if it is to England's advantage. So the EU concept of solidarity leaves them cold. Naturally, they see immigration as a bad thing. Most European nations have their equivalent of the Little Englanders, but in these places it is generally more obvious because they create new political parties, such as the AfD in Germany or Vox in Spain. In England's case, Little Englanders have instead colonized the country's oldest and most traditional party, the Conservatives, popularly known as the Tories, whose history goes all the way back to 1678. It is a Tory Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who has led Britain out of the EU. Ironically, the Tories' full title is the Conservative and Unionist Party. The way things are going, that may have to change before long.